So here's my new MCS suspension from Vorshlag. The dampers are two-way adjustable with 19 positions in rebound and 15 positions for compression. I went with the divorced rear setup. They do make coilovers for the rear, but I wasn't comfortable putting all the weight on the rear shock tower, so I got the divorced setup for the rear. And it's ride height adjustable front and rear. You see the ride height adjustments on the coilovers, and Vorshlag makes these adjusters for the bottom of the spring to adjust the ride height in the rear. So cool setup. I can't wait to get these in, and I guess it's time to get started with that. As with so many jobs on this car, this front cowling needs to be loosened. It just has 4 push clips along the top, 1 bolt on the top layer and 1 bolt on the bottom layer on each side. With those bolts and push clips out, we can take off this weather stripping and remove the under tray from this cowling. The official Ford procedures will say to remove this top cowling to access the strut bolts, but as you can see, we can access them very easily, so that's not necessary, and it requires taking off the window wiper, which is kind of a pain, so this is good enough. And as always, I organize all my fasteners into labeled bags. I would highly suggest doing something similar to that. The first thing I'm going to do down here is disconnect the brake line. This is an 8mm bolt. Now we need to disconnect the ABS sensor, which is this line here. And if we follow it down and look, right there's a tab. You push that tab down and pull the sensor out. Now I just want to get this out of the way. Put that way out of the way. Here's the stock end link, and with this one you need to put an Allen into the center to hold the bolt while you unscrew the nut. I have an aftermarket end link made by Massive. I'm actually switching this out to a white line one during this job, but it has a 9/16 fitting on the back to hold the bolt while you undo the nut. We now have everything disconnected from the strut. Now we need to take out the bolt that holds the knuckle to the strut. That bolt is out. I've actually had this strut out recently, so it should break free pretty easy, but it's still probably a good idea to spray some penetrating oil in here and let it sit for a minute. And also, to loosen up that pinch bracket, you can hammer one of these in it. See, fits in there, and just hammer down there, and that'll open up that pinch bracket a little bit, but you only want to do it a little bit, not too much. I used a crowbar to break the strut off of the knuckle. I put it in this direction. There's a hole in the control arm, so put this crowbar in that hole in the control arm. I was able to grab it and work it down. I got it pretty far with this method. Now I'm going to loosen the bolts on the top of the strut tower so we can work this out of the knuckle. See, we can easily access the nuts here just by loosening up the cowling. There's no reason to take this cowling off. I'm going to loosen these nuts up 2 or 3 turns just so we can have some movement to work the strut out of the knuckle. It required some love taps with a rubber mallet right here, but as you can see, I got it to the end. Now I'm just going to stand on this crowbar and yank that out. And there we go. It's out. So now I just need to finish taking these strut nuts off, but before we do that, we need to disconnect the active suspension wire, which is here, and it just pulls out. And you want to be careful with it as you're removing the strut to make sure you don't get it pinched while the strut's coming out. I'm going to have a friend hold the strut while I undo the last couple nuts. Go ahead, Eric, pull that out of there. Yeah, that strut will just fall out when you undo the last nut. The left side strut is out. Now I'm just going to do the same thing to the other side. I've done the same procedure to the right side. Since I'm doing the right side by myself, I wedged the strut onto the hub, and hopefully that stops it from falling out. The strut wire on the right side has a little tab that you have to lift up to pull it out. The right side strut assembly is out. I ended up holding on to it while undoing the last nut, which was a good thing because wedging it onto the hub did not work. It was going to fall. Now we need to remove the strut brace. There's a window wiper mount on both sides and a couple nuts in the middle. Here's the strut brace off of the car. We're going to have to be able to access the hole in the strut tower, and there's probably two ways to solve that problem. One would be to buy an aftermarket strut brace. I'm just going to have a hole cut in this one, so I'm about to take this down to the metal fabrication shop and have them just cut a hole right here so we can access the adjustments for the coilover. Before the coilovers can be installed, the caster has to be set. Here's a closer look at the Vorshlag Camber plates. This top plate, it has this cool indicator and then lines on the lower plate to mark the camber. I'm going to take this plate off so we can set the caster. With the camber plate off, we can read the orientation markings, and that says RF, which means this is the right front coilover, and the arrow points to the front of the car. So as you can see, it's in its maximum positive caster position. If this was moved all the way to the front, it would be in the stock position. And this has three caster positions: stock, one-step positive, two-step positive. It's currently in the two-step positive position. I had a problem getting it into the strut tower in this position, so I'm going to set it in the one-step positive position. Here it is in the one-step positive position. I'm just going to do this same thing to the left front coilover, and they will be ready to install. Okay, I'm ready to install my first coilover. I'm going to move these collars up to the spring, as the spring's all the way up on the coilover. I'm pretty sure they're going to end up in this area somewhere just to get it to the right height it was before we started this install. But I think it's better to be too high than too low when I first drop it down. Well, here it is with the bolts close to tight. You can still move it here. But as you can see, with the caster in the one-step positive position, it leaves very little room for camber adjustment. Now if I put the caster in the stock position, that would move this more to the center of this hole and definitely get more camber adjustment. So I think I'm going to go with the caster in the stock position. Here it is in the stock caster position. As you can see, it lines up right in the middle, and it has a decent amount more camber adjustment to it, and overall the fitment is better, so I'm definitely going with the stock caster setting. So I'm ready to put the coilover into the knuckle. I have my crowbar here into the lower control arm. I'm going to stand on it and get the coilover started. I've got the coilover started into the knuckle, and I put a jack underneath the control arm there, and I'm going to try to jack the knuckle up onto the coilover. I got the coilover seated in the knuckle. It took a few tries. I figured out that when it doesn't want to go, you just need to kick the top of the brake rotor to get it to line up on the coilover, and it's actually should slide in real easily. If it's not sliding in easily, that means you got the wrong angle of the knuckle to the coilover. Here's the bolt that pinches the knuckle onto the coilover. The Ford procedures say to replace this bolt, and I tried, but nobody locally had it, and I couldn't wait 2 days to finish this job. And I'm pretty sure you replace this bolt because it comes with some sort of Loctite substance on it from the factory. That was the case for this bolt here on the lower control arm right there. I did replace that one recently. So I'm going to clean this bolt off and add a little bit of blue Loctite to it. I cleaned off those threads with a wire brush, and I'm just going to add a little bit of blue Loctite. That gets torqued to 59 pound-feet. I have the massive in-link installed and the ABS sensor. You can see this bracket that the ABS sensor wire would normally go to would hook up like that, but you can't hook it up to the MCS shock. I tried using the left one and putting it on backwards, but it didn't fit quite right. So I was able to salvage this off of the stock shock, and it would normally be down here and connect to this ABS wire, and then you'd have this here going into that bracket. So what I did was just move this up some so it kind of takes the place of both, and I'm hoping that'll be good. I think the brake line, there is no place to put the bracket for the brake line, so I think it'll be good just the way it is. Alright, so I'm going to go do the same thing on the other side and then finish the top. This one was very difficult to get into the knuckle. It did not want to go. I struggled with it. Finally found an easy solution. I have one of these short crowbars and just hammered it in there to open up the knuckle. So if you're struggling with one, that is an easy solution that works real well. One thing I didn't show was how to salvage this ABS sensor wire fastener from the stock strut. I just hold it, you can slide it off once you get the strut off. Then I hold it right here lightly with some vice grips, and it has a tab. Let me get this focused on it right here, so you can push the tab and pull the tie wrap out and reuse it. Okay, the left side is done. Probably a good idea to clean your rotors too, because if you're like me, you got fingerprints all over them. Check this out. Got it back from the metal fabrication shop yesterday. They did a really good job on these holes. Very professional. Look at that. That's perfect. And these do not need to be super tight. They get torqued to 26 pound-feet. Now I've set the camber, can you see in there? To the third line. That's about as far as I could get it, because I believe these things move around in kind of a figure-8 motion, and so you want to leave a little bit of space. You don't want to bump it up against the strut tower. So I think that's going to be the maximum camber I can get. I was able to get the camber adjustment on this one right on the third line as well, and it looks like it has the same distance from the strut tower. So really good fitment. These bolts that hold on the window wiper, that bolt to the strut brace, they call for 60 pound-feet of torque. I broke one of those bolts and I was nowhere near that, so I just snugged them up. Here's the bottom half of the cowling. I'm going to have to modify this to match the hole that was cut into the strut brace. So I have it marked there. I'm just going to use a Dremel tool to cut this out. The Dremel tool was taking too long, so I drilled a bunch of holes along the line, and I'm going to try to finish it off with a hacksaw. The hacksaw didn't work. but with the holes drilled in it, the Dremel tool was making short work of it. I would suggest if you do this, just go from hole to hole with the Dremel tool. I tried to go freestyle right here and messed it up. I could have easily fixed where the holes weren't perfect with a little bit of sanding afterwards. I was able to fix it up pretty well with some sandpaper. I'll probably come back another day and make it even prettier. Here's the pattern I'm going to cut out of the other side. That one went much faster and the job was a lot cleaner. I've got the lower cowling back on and that cut is not bad. This side's even better. I got my caps on. They have a little Allen screw on the side to tighten them on. I put my sticker here in case anyone else is messing with it. And I had a black paint pen sitting around, so I painted the inside of these cutouts. So now it looks factory. The rear installation should go pretty quick. There's not a whole lot to it. First thing we're going to do is disconnect the active suspension wire. Pops off. The first order of business down here will be to loosen the spring. We want to do that first because here's the bolt for the shock and we can get at it much easier with the spring out of the way. To do that, we just have the one bolt right here. I think it's a 15 millimeter to take out. Before we take that bolt out, we're going to want to relieve some of the pressure on it by compressing the spring a little bit. So just jack it up right below that bolt and just a little bit. That should be good. Hard bolts like these to break free, I like to use the circle end of a wrench. With that bolt out, we can lower the jack and release the spring. This comes right out. That is a Mountoon sports spring. That is not the stock spring. Now I'm going to unbolt the lower end of the shock. And you see with that spring gone, we've got good room to put a ratchet. For this one, I'm going to put the ratchet on it and push this arm out of the way with my foot and hammer on it here. I've already done the other side and it's a little bit more difficult because it's opposite, and so you have to push up. And on the right side, I laid on the ground underneath it and pushed up on it like bench pressing, was able to break it free that way. I've got the bolt on the lower end of the shock broke loose, so now I'm supporting the hub with a jack and I'm going to remove that bolt from the lower end of the shock. And now we just have two more bolts up at the top of the shock, or two more nuts to take off, and we'll have everything out. Here is the stock shock. This top piece here we need to take off and reuse. The best way to get that off is with an impact wrench. A couple seconds with an impact wrench and it's off. Here's the MCS shock. It comes with two spacers and these two nuts. This larger spacer goes underneath this fitting, and the smaller spacer and the two nuts go on top of it. I talked to one of the techs at Vorshlag to verify this. Okay, so we put this larger spacer on. We put this fitting on top of that. Now the smaller spacer and one of these nuts. Now with this one, this little fitting up top is for the wheel that you use to adjust the shock, and you absolutely cannot use that to hold onto the armature to tighten this nut. The only way, the absolute only way to tighten this nut is with an impact wrench. Tighten the second nut on there the same way, and this is ready to install. I've got the two top nuts started. I left a little bit of play in them so we can line this up. It's probably best to point that fitting on there right here to the rear, so if you ever need to access it, you can. And now I'm just going to use the jack to line up the shock with the hole here and get that bolt in. Just remember the bolt that goes into the shock has the larger flange, and I put a little dab of blue Loctite on it. Alright, the last thing we need to do is install the springs. This is the ride height adjuster. It's installed like this with the long part down. There we go. And then that goes on top like that to hold the spring. And there it is. The bolt on the lower arm is tightened. It gets torqued to 85 foot-pounds. The same with the bolt on the lower end of the shock. Those two nuts are 18 foot-pounds, so not very tight. And I've cleaned my brake rotor because I was grabbing it and kicking it trying to get that lower arm hole aligned. And it's done. I'm about to put the wheels on. Well, I've driven on the suspension for a few weeks and made multiple ride height adjustments. I settled on this position here, which puts it exactly where the Mount Tune Sport Springs were, and that's about an inch below stock height. The rears adjust much lower than the fronts, so you can easily take the rake out if you want. I left the rake in. But to adjust them, you have to have both back wheels off the ground. And once you have both back wheels off the ground, it's real easy. Just stick your finger in here and hold the top piece. And then with your other hand, you can grab this and spin it to adjust the ride height. So I'm done with my ride height adjustments, but I'm going to be experimenting with these damper settings for a long time. I mean, these dampers are great. They have 19 different positions for rebound and 15 different positions for compression. You can make this thing ride like a 1983 Lincoln Continental all the way up to a super stiff race car. I was at Sebring last weekend, which is a bumpy track, and found a good setting for a bumpy track, which was 10 clicks from 0 for both the rebound and compression in the front, and 10 clicks from 0 for the compression in the rear, and 12 clicks from 0 for the rebound in the rear.